In 2009, a city infrastructure inspector named Tyrese Coleman left home on a rainy Tuesday morning in Chicago and was never seen again. No body, no witness, no closure. Official reports labeled it as a disappearance, unfortunate, unexplained, and quietly forgotten. But 7 years later, a rusted manhole behind a long abandoned reservoir opened a door not only into the past, but into a secret the city had buried deep underground. What began as a family's grief turned into a descent through layers of lies, corruption, and one man's dying attempt to expose them all. This is not just a mystery, it is a reckoning. A story about memory refusing to die, and a voice, once silenced, that learned how to speak through concrete, flame, and time. Because sometimes, what we bury doesn't stay buried. The sun dipped low behind the hills of Riverside, California, casting long, gold-tinted shadows across the city's infrastructure yard as Tyrese Coleman adjusted his reflective vest and scanned the maintenance report one last time. The air was dry with a tinge of metal, the scent of dust and concrete lingering from a hot October day. He took a deep breath, slid into the driver's seat of his municipal utility vehicle, and turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life with a familiar low rumble, a sound he'd heard countless times over the past 5 years. But tonight, that sound felt strangely final. Tyrese was not a man prone to premonitions. He believed in schematics, soil moisture sensors, and pressure calibration units, not signs or superstitions. Yet, as he pulled out of Lot 3 and passed under the flickering streetlight at the yard's entrance, a subtle weight pressed against his chest, as though something unsaid clung to the air. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the silence left behind when you're the last technician scheduled on the grid. It was Friday, October 23rd, 2009. He was 32, with calloused hands and a quiet smile. Known among colleagues for his precision and patience, Tyrese often volunteered for late shifts so others could go home to their families. He had none left, at least not in this city. His parents had passed in his early 20s. His younger brother, Marcus, had moved north to Oakland, trying to make a fresh start after their mother's funeral. And as for Tyrese, he'd stayed, built a life here, made something solid from sorrow. Tonight's route was simple: a routine inspection of valve stations along the West Basin, a stretch of underground lines feeding into the outdated treatment facility near Lincoln Avenue. Most of the job would be solo: manhole covers, pressure checks, log entries, in and out by midnight. He'd done this 100 times. The only thing different was the silence. No radio chatter, no colleagues in the next vehicle over, just the rhythmic hum of tires against asphalt and the occasional glint of his own high-visibility vest in the rearview mirror. At 9:17 p.m., security footage later confirmed Tyrese's vehicle passed through the north gate of Water Treatment Facility Number 3. He keyed in the gate code himself, paused briefly in front of the old brick control building, and drove to the base of the main retention wall. His routine would have started there: pressure readout on the valve monitors, inspection of leakage patterns near the overflow basin, and logging anomalies before the upcoming quarterly audit. But that was the last moment anyone ever saw Tyrese Coleman alive. The next morning, his supervisor, Dennis Whitaker, grew concerned when the check-in sheet remained blank and no vehicle had returned to the yard. Marcus received the call at 6:23 a.m., his phone vibrating violently on the kitchen table of his one-bedroom apartment 2 cities away. Tyrese, Dennis said, hadn't reported back. His utility truck was missing, and no one had heard from him since last night. What followed was a whirlwind of procedures. A missing persons report was filed. Facility security tapes were pulled and scrutinized. Local patrols were dispatched to sweep the treatment zone and the surrounding spillways. Divers even searched parts of the retention basin, but murky sediment and poor visibility made it difficult. Still, nothing. All that was recovered was Tyrese's hard hat, left inside the open-air control shack, neatly placed on a rusted metal bench, as if set down mid-task and forgotten. It didn't make sense. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tire marks exiting the back gate. It was as though he had vanished into the night, swallowed whole by the concrete belly of the city he helped maintain. In the weeks that followed, rumors festered like mold under damp stone. Some said he had run away, left everything behind to escape a life too routine, too heavy. Others whispered about sabotage, that he'd uncovered something during a routine check he wasn't supposed to see. One theory spiraled into another, but none of them filled the hollow space Marcus felt growing inside his chest each time he visited the site. Tyrese wasn't the kind of man who walked away. He was the kind who stayed when others left, who fixed leaks at 2 a.m. and spent Sundays repairing broken street hydrants without overtime, who bought his neighbor's kid a secondhand backpack when school started, who called Marcus every other week just to hear his voice, even if the conversations were short. Now that voice was gone. 7 years passed. The world changed around the silence of Tyrese's disappearance. His personnel file was boxed and shelved, his utility number reassigned, his name etched on a memorial wall beside others taken too early. But Marcus never stopped wondering. He returned to Riverside in 2013, took a position at the same water department. Not because he needed the job. He needed to feel close to something, anything, that might hold the echo of his brother. Then, on a gray morning in April 2016, the phone rang again. A city contractor, working on sediment removal at the base of reservoir site number 3, had pulled something strange from the mud. A rusted municipal utility truck buried halfway in clay. A maintenance tag on the bumper read 09110C. Tyrese's vehicle. Marcus froze. 7 years after that final shift. 7 years after that last breath of desert wind through the wire fences. 7 years of nothing. Now, the ground had finally given something back. And with it, a question whispered through the rustling reeds at the edge of the water. Where had Tyrese Coleman gone that night? And who had followed him there? The morning air was sharp with the scent of disturbed earth and diesel as Marcus Coleman stood at the edge of the drained reservoir, eyes locked on the battered utility vehicle half submerged in a bed of cracked mud and rust-colored silt. City workers, clad in neon vests, moved cautiously around the perimeter, while a forensics team in white coveralls approached the wreck with a reverence more suited to a gravesite than a construction zone. The water had been drained for scheduled maintenance, routine, unremarkable, but what they found buried beneath 7 years of runoff and decay was anything but. The truck's frame was twisted, the paint nearly eroded, but the department's faded emblem still clung to the driver's side door like a ghost refusing to let go. Marcus didn't need to check the serial number again. He'd already read it twice, hands trembling, mouth dry. 09110C. His brother's. Tyrese's. The vehicle had not been crushed or rolled. There was no visible external trauma. It was just there, sunken, as if time itself had lowered it gently beneath the surface and forgotten it. Detective Charles Rivas, older now with grayer temples and the same unshakable gaze, walked up beside him. "We're sealing the area," he said quietly, watching the forensic team pry open the door with hydraulic tools. "It's officially a crime scene again." Marcus nodded, though his mind spun with memories he had tried to suppress. The late-night call, the unanswered questions, the endless weeks spent knocking on doors and tracing hollow leads. For 7 years, he had lived between denial and rage, constructing theories in the quiet corners of his mind, all of which collapsed this morning with the unmistakable groan of metal being unearthed from silence. "Anything inside?" Marcus asked, his voice lower than he expected. Rivas didn't answer right away. One of the technicians stepped back from the open truck, shaking her head slightly. "No body," she said. "But we found this wedged beneath the passenger seat." She held up a thin rectangular object sealed in a clear evidence bag. Tyrese's city-issued field notebook. Marcus stepped closer, heart pounding. The cover was warped and water-stained, but he could make out the faded label. T. Coleman, valve, root W3. A gloved hand flipped it open slowly, revealing warped pages filled with his brother's neat handwriting, pressure readings, and site logs. And then, torn, water-blurred, but still visible, was a name scribbled in the corner of the final page. Alyssa. Marcus froze. "What the hell?" he whispered. He hadn't seen that name in years, hadn't thought of the woman Jaden had started dating barely a year after Tyrese vanished. Alyssa Green. Marcus remembered her vaguely, friendly, soft-spoken, a bit reserved. She had worked in an admin office downtown, or maybe a library. He couldn't remember. But seeing her name in Tyrese's field journal from the night he disappeared sent a ripple of dread through his chest. "You know her?" Rivas asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "She's with Jaden now. My brother's best friend." The detective's brow furrowed. "And she was with him then?" "No," Marcus said. "Not that I knew. She came into the picture later, but this This was written the night Tyrese went missing. Rivas took the notebook and bagged it carefully. We'll check all city logs, see if she had any work orders near the facility. Maybe he was doing a favor. But if she wasn't authorized to be there... His voice trailed off, but Marcus understood. 7 years had passed, but evidence didn't lie. Back then, the investigation had stalled due to lack of leads, no witness accounts, no digital trail, no remains, just a man who vanished mid-shift. But now they had a location, a vehicle, and a name. That evening, Marcus returned to the department depot, standing alone in the garage bay where Tyrese's gear had once hung. Nothing remained. New hires had long replaced the locker numbers, and his brother's nameplate had been tossed into some archive box in city storage. Still, Marcus stood there as if waiting for something to rise from the concrete, as if memory itself could be excavated like clay. He pulled out his phone and stared at Jaden's contact info, thumb hovering over the call button. It had been months since they last spoke. Their friendship had never fully healed after Tyrese vanished. They'd tried in the beginning, drinks, check-ins, shared grief. But something between them had frayed, and neither man had the tools to stitch it back together. Still, if Alyssa's name was in that journal, Marcus needed to ask. He tapped the screen. 3 rings, then Jaden's voice. Familiar, a little tired. Yo, Marcus, been a while? Yeah, listen, are you home? Yeah. Alyssa and I just finished dinner. Why? Marcus hesitated. I need to talk to you, in person. It's about Ty. A pause, then a quiet, guarded tone. Okay? Come by. 30 minutes later, Marcus pulled into the driveway of a modest, single-story home tucked in a quiet corner of Riverside's east side. A warm porch light illuminated the entrance. He spotted a baby swing folded against the side of the house. His stomach twisted. Alyssa was pregnant. Jaden had mentioned it offhand in a text last year. He remembered being surprised, unsure whether to congratulate or worry. He approached the door and knocked. Jaden answered in jeans and a white t-shirt, casual, open-faced. But there was tension behind his smile. Come in, he said. What's going on? Marcus stepped into the living room, eyes adjusting to the cozy light. Alyssa emerged from the hallway, her long dark hair pulled back, a subtle curve beneath her blouse. She smiled. Genuine. Polite. Hey, Marcus. It's been so long. Yeah, he said, barely hearing himself. Sorry for dropping in like this. No worries, she replied, touching her stomach lightly. You want some water? I'm good, he said. He turned to Jaden. They found Tyrese's truck. The words landed like a dropped weight. Jaden's mouth opened, but no sound came. Alyssa froze. What? She asked. Where? Marcus stared at them both. Buried in the reservoir at the old treatment facility, same place he disappeared. Jaden sat slowly, his face pale. Alyssa remained standing, one hand braced on the arm of the sofa. Marcus pulled out a small folded paper from his jacket, a copy of the notebook page. He laid it on the table. This was in his field log, dated the night he went missing. Alyssa leaned forward, then froze. Her eyes locked on her name, scribbled in faded ink. Just 5 letters, but it was enough to shatter the air in the room. I don't understand, she whispered. Marcus didn't respond. He watched her, and in that silence, something in her eyes shifted, just for a moment, before she looked away. The silence in Jaden's living room stretched longer than it should have, the kind of silence that didn't just fill a space. It expanded inside it, curling like smoke in the corners of Marcus's mind as he watched Alyssa's eyes scan the name on the faded journal copy again and again, as if by sheer repetition she could deny its presence or rewrite the truth it carried. But the 5 letters were still there. ALYSSA, written in Tyrese's careful hand, dated October 23, 2009, the night he vanished without a trace. Jaden was still seated, elbows on his knees, face buried in his palms. But Alyssa had stepped back from the table now, one hand cradling her stomach, the other clenched at her side, and Marcus noticed, not for the first time, that she hadn't asked how the truck was found or what else had been recovered, only where. There was a chill in the air despite the heater humming softly through the vents, and Marcus could feel the weight of something rising, something old and buried and sharp-edged that had waited for 7 long years beneath the surface of their carefully constructed normalcy. It could have been anyone, Alyssa said finally, her voice soft, too soft, like a question wrapped in denial. Alyssa's a common name. maybe he met someone else that night. Someone from work? Her gaze met Marcus's, wide and pleading, but behind the sheen of fear there was calculation, a flicker of mental gears turning too quickly, and Marcus, trained now by grief, sharpened by years of unanswered questions, caught the hesitation. He never wrote names unless he had a reason, Marcus said quietly, stepping closer to the coffee table where the paper lay like a loaded weapon. And he never logged a name without an address, unless it was personal. Jaden looked up then, face pale and drawn, his eyes flicking from Marcus to Alyssa, then back again, the beginnings of something like doubt creeping into his voice. "You knew Tyrese before we got together?" he asked slowly, the question trembling on the edge of a realization he didn't want. Alyssa didn't answer right away. She looked between the two men, blinking as if her thoughts were scattering and reforming faster than she could control them, then finally let out a shallow breath and gave a small nod. "We met. Once," she said. "I used to work part-time at that complex on Fairview, the old apartments near the west side. I was filling in for the front desk that day. He came in to check a leak or something. I don't remember the details. It was years ago." "That's the building Tyrese had scheduled on his route," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "It was the last confirmed address he checked in at that night. You're saying it was just a coincidence?" "Yes," she snapped, a little too quickly, then added, "I didn't even remember until now." But Marcus saw it again. That flicker. That blink of panic. Jaden stood slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked. "If you even had a brief connection to him?" "Because I didn't think it mattered," Alyssa said, her voice hardening. "I didn't even know who he was until months later. And by then—" She stopped, swallowed, her shoulders tensing. It felt wrong to bring it up. Marcus stepped closer now, folding the paper and sliding it back into his jacket. "We found more than just the truck," he lied, watching her face carefully. "We found signs someone tried to wipe it clean. And his gear, it was all there, except his ID badge. Why would someone take his badge but leave everything else? Unless they didn't want anyone knowing who he was when the body was dumped." Alyssa paled. "Wait, you said they didn't find a body." Marcus nodded slowly. "I said we didn't find a body. I didn't say we found nothing. It was a bluff. He had no confirmation of remains. But he wanted to see how she'd react. And the way her lips parted in stunned silence, the way her hand pressed against her stomach like a shield, it told him something she wasn't ready to admit. Jaden turned away, moving to the kitchen, muttering something about needing water, but Marcus didn't move. He stared at Alyssa until she looked up again, this time her eyes glistening, not with guilt, but fury. "You think I hurt him?" she asked in a whisper that hissed between clenched teeth. "You think I killed your brother?" "I think you know more than you've ever told," Marcus replied, "and I think whatever happened that night didn't end at the reservoir." A long pause followed, broken only by the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking outside. Then Alyssa said, almost too calmly, "I'm going to bed. I'm pregnant. I won't be accused in my own home." And she walked down the hall without waiting for permission. Jaden returned with a glass of water, stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes hollow. "You think she did it?" he asked quietly. "I think she's hiding something," Marcus said. "And I don't think she just crossed paths with Tyrese. I think that night, something went wrong, and she's been pretending ever since." Jaden nodded slowly. "I need time to think." "You don't have time," Marcus said. "If she knows the police are reopening this case, she might do something stupid." As he stepped out into the night, the wind picked up, whispering through the hedges along the driveway. Marcus got into his car, hands tight on the wheel, and stared at the soft-lit window of the room where Alyssa had disappeared. 7 years, a single name, and now the truth was beginning to crack through the facade like pressure behind an old pipeline. He didn't know where it would burst next, but he would be ready. It was nearly midnight when Marcus pulled into the dim parking lot of the Riverside Police Department, his headlights cutting through the thin veil of mist that had begun to settle over the asphalt like the breath of something unseen. The building stood squat and heavy against the night, all glass and concrete, a brutalist relic lit from within by tired fluorescence. Detective Rivas was waiting just inside the lobby, still in his gray shirt sleeves, tie loosened, holding a styrofoam cup of what had to be his 4th or 5th coffee of the day. His expression was harder now, more alert than when they had stood by the reservoir earlier that morning. "We got something," he said simply, leading Marcus down a quiet corridor to the tech unit's small, windowless back room. Inside, Officer Amari, young, focused, surrounded by glowing screens, was scrubbing through digitized surveillance footage, fingers dancing across the keyboard like a pianist, lost in a dark melody. On one monitor, a grainy video feed played in silent loops. "This is from October 23, 2009, Rivas explained. "We got lucky. The traffic department used to archive everything on micro drives. One of our old guys remembered a batch stored at the district facility. We cross-referenced the facility entrance near the reservoir with surrounding intersections, and..." He gestured toward the screen. Marcus stepped closer, breath-catching. The camera angle was elevated. An old traffic cam mounted high on a streetlight overlooking Industrial Avenue. The timestamp read 10:46 p.m. The footage showed a familiar utility truck turning slowly into a narrow alley beside the Fairview Apartments. Tyrese's truck. The vehicle paused beneath a flickering lamppost, then disappeared into the shadow of the building. "That's the last time the truck was seen moving," Officer Amari said. "Now look at this. This feed is from a different angle, about 30 minutes later." He switched to another screen. The view was grainier, black and white, taken from a security cam above the apartment's loading dock. At 11:17 p.m., a figure emerged from a side door. Marcus leaned in, eyes narrowing. The person wore an oversized hoodie, face obscured by the hood, dragging something behind them. Something that looked like a duffel bag or toolkit. Their movements were deliberate, but the figure paused often, checking over their shoulder, adjusting their grip. "Wait," Marcus said. "Zoom in on the right hand." Officer Amari did. The image sharpened slightly, still blurred at the edges, but clear enough to reveal a glint of metal. "Keys. That's the municipal tag," Marcus whispered. "Tyrese always clipped his master keyring on a carabiner with a brass number tab." "Keep watching," Rivas said. The footage continued. The figure disappeared from view for several minutes, then reappeared, this time wheeling a small cart. On it what appeared to be a folded jumpsuit and a pair of boots, both familiar in their shape. Marcus's stomach dropped. The cart reached the corner of the building, then the figure paused and turned, just for a second, as if listening. The hoodie slipped back slightly. A profile came into view, slender jawline, narrow chin, long hair. "Pause," Rivas said sharply. Amari froze the frame. "Can you enhance?" "Only slightly," the officer said, tweaking the contrast. The image brightened, grain sizzling at the edges. But there it was, a ghost of a face, hair tumbling in curls down the figure's shoulder, a shadow of familiarity that punched through Marcus like a gut wound. "It's her," he said, voice low. "That's Alyssa." "That was our guess too," Rivas said. "We cross-checked the footage timestamps with the original property logs from Fairview Apartments. Guess who was registered as a temporary building assistant that week?" "No," Marcus said, though he already knew. "Alyssa Green, hired part-time through a leasing agency, started 2 weeks before Tyrese disappeared. No permanent file on record, only paper forms, which were discarded by 2010 when the management changed hands." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, staring at the paused frame like it might speak to him. "She knew," he murmured. "She saw him that night." "There's more," Rivas said. "This morning you told me she gave you a package to mail, yes?" Marcus nodded. "Said it was for her mother, Colorado. We traced the return address. It's fake, doesn't exist. But the origin, that's real. Apartment 514. Fairview Apartments." Marcus blinked. "Wait, that's the exact apartment?" "Tyrese was last scheduled to inspect," Rivas finished. "That unit had a plumbing work order logged in the city's system. The request came from a public terminal. No traceable user ID. Just a general service report requesting emergency inspection due to pipe pressure fluctuations. Tyrese picked it up that morning, logged it into his route sheet." Marcus exhaled shakily. "So, she set the trap." "We think so," Rivas said. "We still don't know why. Not entirely, but everything points to her." "What about the package?" Marcus asked. "The one she gave me?" Rivas's mouth tightened. "Still sealed, sitting in our evidence locker, but with the surveillance, the logs, and the notebook, it's enough to get a warrant for a full search." Marcus stared at the screen again, at the figure that had haunted his nightmares without a face until now. 7 years. 7 years pretending. Living. Sleeping next to Jaden. Carrying his child. Laughing in the kitchen. All while knowing what happened that night. All while walking around with the weight of a secret that should have drowned long ago. "We go in the morning," Rivas said. Early, before she can run. She'll know, Marcus said. She's smart and paranoid. Then we move faster, Rivas said. You sure you're ready for what we might find? Marcus didn't look away from the screen. I've been ready since the day he didn't come home. The evidence room was cold, too cold, as though it had absorbed the chill of every secret ever sealed within it. And Marcus felt that cold seep into his bones as he stood behind the glass window, watching Detective Rivas snap on a pair of latex gloves and gently lift the box Alyssa had tried to ship out of Riverside, a plain cardboard package with carefully folded edges, sealed neatly with clear tape, and a printed label that now looked like a false passport. A destination never meant to be reached. The return address was fake, they'd confirmed that, but the item inside was real enough to change everything if what Marcus feared proved true. A forensic tech stood nearby with a handheld camera, documenting every movement as Rivas brought the box to the steel table, adjusted the lighting, and made the first incision through the top seal with a scalpel, slow and deliberate. The room was silent except for the soft rip of tape and the low hum of the air vent above. The box opened like a wound, its contents layered with protective foam and a single folded blanket on top, blue, with faded cartoon prints that looked like they belonged to a child's crib or an old nursery. Rivas paused. "Recognize this?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded, throat tight. "It was Tyrese's," he said. "He kept it from when we were kids, said he'd use it for his future family." Rivas lifted the blanket, and beneath it was something that made Marcus step back, hand pressed to his chest, pulse roaring in his ears. A folded uniform, municipal utility department standard, neatly packed, as if by reverent hands. The name tag was still attached. T. Coleman, his brother's uniform. Beneath that, a bundle of smaller items, a worn-out leather belt, still bearing the imprint of a clipped radio, a pair of gloves, a pressure gauge. And finally, nestled at the bottom of the box in a separate container wrapped in cloth, was a ceramic urn, white with delicate gold etching around the rim. It looked out of place in the context of this grim reveal, too elegant to belong here, too carefully chosen. Rivas looked at Marcus once, then slowly lifted the urn. It had weight. When he turned it slightly, something inside shifted with a dull, granular sound. Ashes. Bones. Marcus's knees nearly buckled. "Jesus," he whispered. "She kept him." "We won't know until we test it," Rivas said, his voice controlled but grim. "But I think you already do." The forensic tech approached with a new evidence container, gently placing the urn inside. "We'll run isotope analysis and DNA if we can isolate it. Shouldn't take long to get preliminary confirmation." Marcus sat down, his body no longer trusting its own strength. "She was trying to send him away," he murmured. Like discarding the last piece of guilt. "Or a farewell ritual," Rivas offered. "Some people keep trophies, some bury them, some try to burn them. She did all three." The implications rolled through Marcus like thunder across a canyon. For 7 years, Alyssa had lived a life built on a lie, one she tucked into boxes, folded into fresh sheets, and whispered away behind kisses and baby showers. She hadn't just moved on from the night Tyrese vanished. She had carried it with her, concealed it beneath her skin, preserved him like a relic, not out of love, but obsession. Later that night, Marcus sat in his car parked outside the hospital, where Alyssa had been taken earlier for prenatal care. She didn't know they had opened the package. She didn't know the DNA tests had been expedited, or that the judge had approved a full search warrant on her current home and previous apartment. But she would soon. Rivas had made the call. At 6 a.m., they would raid both locations simultaneously. One team for the Fairview unit, one for the house on Chestnut Drive. Marcus had insisted on coming, and after some resistance, Rivas relented, only on the condition that Marcus stay outside during the execution. Marcus agreed, but he knew in his bones he wouldn't be able to sit still if they found what he thought they would find. The final puzzle piece, the last sliver of evidence to prove Alyssa hadn't just covered up a death. She had orchestrated it, and then built a life on top of it. As he stared out at the hospital's second-floor windows, he imagined her lying in bed, one hand on her belly, the other still stained with the past, dreaming of a future that had no right to exist. He thought about Jaden too, his best friend, now the unwitting father of a child conceived in the shadow of a crime neither of them had seen coming. Did he still believe her? Was he sitting at home wondering why the woman he loved had a dead man's clothes packed into a box in their garage? Or was he trying, as Marcus once had, to bury the ache in the safest possible version of truth? The one that said, people don't just vanish. The one that said, the people we love are incapable of monsters. At 5:15 a.m., Marcus started the car and pulled away from the curb. Tomorrow, everything would change. The lie would collapse. The truth would rise. And what they would find, inside the walls, behind the memories, under the floorboards, would finally tell them what happened to Tyrese Coleman on the night of his final shift. The morning sky over Riverside was the color of dull steel as two unmarked police vehicles idled silently on opposite ends of Chestnut Drive, their engines low, headlights off, tires braced against the curb like predators crouched in the final seconds before a kill, and Marcus Coleman stood beside Detective Rivas, just outside the property line, heart hammering in his chest as the soft static of radio murmurs crackled through Rivas's earpiece, confirming that the secondary team had arrived simultaneously at the Fairview apartments, warrant in hand, waiting for the go signal. The neighborhood was still asleep, curtains drawn, sprinklers ticking somewhere in the distance like a countdown. But to Marcus, the air felt thick, electric, like it was holding its breath with him. He could see the house, small, beige, ordinary, a single porch light flickering like a heartbeat at the threshold. Jaden's truck sat parked in the driveway, crooked. The baby swing was still by the side fence, its canvas swaying gently in the early morning breeze. Rivas checked his watch, gave a single nod, and whispered, "Move." The officers surged forward, a sudden burst of controlled force, tactical and precise. 3 to the front, 2 to the back. Their footsteps muffled on the grass, guns raised, vests tight, shouts slicing through the dawn like a blade. "Riverside PD, search warrant!" There was a pause, then a crashing sound. Glass breaking, a door forced, the bark of a startled dog from down the street, and then silence. Marcus didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until Rivas raised a fist, signaling him to stay put by the car. But he couldn't. Not entirely. He took a step closer, just far enough to see through the open front door, as 2 officers moved swiftly through the living room, clearing corners, checking behind doors. And then, from the back hallway, a voice called out, "2 subjects located, bedroom, unarmed." Rivas entered the house moments later, disappearing into the corridor. Marcus stood alone now, fists clenched at his sides, watching shadows shift through the curtained windows. He tried to picture what was happening in there. How Alyssa must have looked when the door flew open, when the lights and voices flooded her sanctuary of lies. Did she panic? Did she run? Or did she already know this moment would come, and simply waited for it with quiet fatalism, the way someone might wait for a storm that's already broken the windows? 5 minutes passed, then 10. When Rivas finally emerged, he looked grave. "They're separated," he said. "Jaden's in the kitchen. Alyssa's being held in the guest room while we conduct the search. She didn't say much, just sat down and asked if it was about the package." Marcus nodded. "It is." "She also asked if you opened it yourself," Rivas added. "When I said yes, she went quiet, didn't deny anything, just said, 'I figured he would.'" A tremor ran through Marcus's spine. "She's expecting this," he murmured, "almost like she wants it." Inside, the forensic team had already begun tearing through closets, pulling up loose floorboards in the master bedroom, inspecting air vents and crawl spaces. In the garage, they found a locked trunk buried beneath a layer of old baby clothes and moving boxes. Rivas pried it open. Inside were items that didn't belong, things that had no reason to be there unless they were trophies or reminders. Tyrese's watch, his department badge, a photo ID worn at the edges, a single work boot with a cracked sole. "Jesus," one officer whispered. Marcus stood behind them now, unable to keep his distance, his eyes scanning the contents with a rising tide of nausea. "She kept all of it," he said, "not just the uniform. Everything." "We'll send it for prints, fibers, trace," Rivas said. "But it's enough. With the package and the video, it's more than enough." In the living room, Jaden sat hunched over the kitchen table, face blank, hands threaded together so tightly his knuckles turned white. Marcus entered slowly. "Did you know?" he asked. Jaden looked up, eyes bloodshot. "No." "God, Marcus, I swear to you, I didn't know. I didn't even know they'd met. She told me she barely remembered your brother. Marcus's voice cracked. She killed him. Jaden shook his head like a man trying to wake from a nightmare. She never said anything, never gave any signs. You lived with her, Marcus said. You were going to raise a child with her. I still don't believe it, Jaden whispered. Even with all this, I keep hoping there's some other explanation, something we're not seeing. Marcus stared at him for a long time, then quietly said, There's a line between hoping and refusing to see. Rivas returned a moment later, holding a phone. We got a call from Fairview. The second team found something hidden in a wall behind Unit 514. They're bagging it now. What is it? Marcus asked. Small bones, Rivas replied, wrapped in cloth. Probably animal, but they're sending them to the lab to confirm. She went back, Marcus said. After all these years, she returned to the place she started it. Why? Sometimes, Rivas said, killers visit the grave. Outside, Alyssa sat in the back of the squad car, wrists cuffed, eyes blank, her body still as stone. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared forward, her gaze unblinking as Marcus stepped out onto the lawn and met her eyes across the distance. There was no hate in her expression, no rage, just a silence deeper than guilt, more permanent than sorrow. A silence that had already buried one man and was now beginning to bury her. As the sun finally cracked the horizon, painting the quiet street in gold and gray, Marcus stood in the driveway where his brother's murderer had once stood smiling, laughing, planning a nursery. And now the walls were empty, and the house was quiet, and justice, long dormant, was finally awake. The walls of Interrogation Room 3 were the same dull gray they had always been, featureless and heavy, designed less to intimidate than to drain, to pull the warmth out of a person slowly and leave them sitting in silence long enough to feel the full weight of their own thoughts. And Alyssa Green sat perfectly still beneath the harsh, fluorescent bulb, hands folded on the cold metal table, her wrists now free of cuffs, but not of consequence. The stillness in her body too deliberate to be natural, the kind of stillness that came not from fear, but from control, from calculation, honed over years of practiced silence. Detective Rivas entered first, followed by Officer Amari with a manila folder, and Marcus just behind them, granted special observation status by the chief himself, due to the extraordinary circumstances. He would not speak, would not interfere, but he had earned the right to see this through with his own eyes. From behind the two-way glass, Marcus could see everything. The angle of Alyssa's jaw, the slight arch of her brow when Rivas greeted her calmly, the way her fingers traced slow circles across the tabletop, like a clock winding itself backward. Miss Green, Rivas began, voice even but firm, I'm going to ask you a few questions. You are not under arrest, yet. You are here voluntarily, and you are free to leave unless we find reason to charge you. Do you understand? Alyssa gave a single nod, eyes on his tie, not his face. Yes, she said quietly. Do you know why you're here? Because of the box, she replied. Because of Tyrese. Rivas studied her. That's an unusual admission. We haven't said anything about what was in the box. You didn't need to, Alyssa said, her voice almost a whisper. I knew when Marcus looked at me. A pause followed, just long enough for everyone in the room to feel it. Rivas placed the manila folder on the table and opened it. Inside were still frames from surveillance footage, photos of the items found in her garage, copies of the maintenance logs from 2009. He laid them out slowly, one by one, like a hand of cards in a game with no bluffing left. You were working at Fairview Apartments in October 2009, under a temporary name provided by the leasing agency. You filed a work order using a city kiosk. That request went directly to Tyrese Coleman's department. He accepted the assignment. That evening he was seen on traffic cam turning into the alley behind the complex. His vehicle was found 7 years later buried in the reservoir, with no body, no report, and your name written on the final page of his logbook. Do you deny any of that? Alyssa shook her head once. No, Rivas leaned forward. Then explain. Alyssa stared at the ceiling, eyes unfocused, and for a long moment, Marcus thought she might refuse, that she would let the silence win. But then, with a breath like the beginning of a confession, she began. He wasn't supposed to die, she said. I just wanted to talk to him. I knew who he was. Jaden used to show me pictures of his friends, the ones from before, the ones that still came around, And Tyrese, he was perfect. Everyone adored him. So smart, so put together, so permanent. Like he couldn't be broken. But I knew how to break people. I'd learned that long before I ever met him. She glanced toward the mirror then, and though she couldn't see Marcus, he felt her look like a hand on his chest. I invited him in. Said there was a leak in the kitchen. He came in smiling, polite. I offered him tea. He said no. I kept talking. He looked confused, asked how I knew his name. I told him I was a fan, of the city workers, of the ones who kept things running while the world ignored them. He laughed, awkward, then said he had to go. She paused. And that's when I lost it. Revis's pen hovered over his notepad, unmoving. What do you mean by that? I don't remember it clearly, Alyssa said. One minute I was begging him to stay, and the next, he was on the floor. I don't even remember grabbing the wrench, but I saw the blood. I saw his fingers twitch, and I knew it was too late. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. She said it so plainly, so without trembling, like describing a scene from someone else's memory. Why didn't you call for help? Revis asked. Alyssa turned to him then, eyes hollow. Because no one ever helped me. Not when I ran away. Not when I was 12 and locked in a shelter where they forgot I existed for 3 days. Not when I tried to start over and they looked at me like I was trash. But Tyrese, he got everything. So I took it back. You lived with the man's best friend, Revis said, tone tightening. You built a life on top of this. Why? Because I had to make it mean something, she replied, her voice barely audible now. If I could love Jaden, if I could make a child, then maybe it would balance the scale. Revis closed the folder. We're charging you with second-degree murder, obstruction, concealment of remains, and tampering with evidence. You have the right to remain silent. But Alyssa didn't hear him anymore. Her eyes had drifted to the mirror again, to the space behind it, and as they cuffed her and read her rights, Marcus saw something flicker across her face, something almost like relief. Dot. The notebook trembled in Jaden's hand as if it carried a pulse of its own. He sat silently in the passenger seat of Marcus's aging Toyota, the pages of Tyrese's old spiral-bound logbook lying open across his knees. One page in particular had stopped both men cold. The list, written in Tyrese's tight, deliberate handwriting, was short but surgical. 5 names. The first was obvious, Marcus Coleman. The second, however, was not. Andrea Morales, Office of City Inspections. Marcus hadn't heard that name in years, but the moment he saw it, it detonated something in his memory. She was involved in the redistricting back in 2009, he murmured, the words tumbling out like dry gravel. There was some kind of internal scandal. Data leaks, site approvals pushed through without full inspections. She disappeared from the headlines just before Tyrese did. Jaden looked over. You think she's connected to what happened to him? Marcus nodded slowly. Either she helped him, or she helped make him disappear. With barely a word, Marcus started the car and pulled out onto the street. He drove with the kind of quiet intensity Jaden had only ever seen in people carrying too much grief for too long. As they passed the intersection at Cherry and Monroe, just 3 blocks from where Tyrese was last seen alive, Jaden finally spoke. She still work for the city? Marcus gave a dry laugh. They gave her a quiet promotion in 2010. Moved her to 3rd Street, Upper Records Division. No press, no noise. But she's there. She never left. They found the building without much trouble. A brutalist gray structure tucked between an abandoned post office and a shuttered diner. The city archives office loomed like a tomb for forgotten paperwork. Inside, time had stopped. Dust floated like mist, and the air smelled of cardboard and old ink. At a far-end desk, a woman in her late 50s sat behind a tower of boxes. Her face was older, softer than the picture Marcus had pulled from the city staff registry, but the eyes were unmistakable. When Marcus said her name, she froze. Her hands, which had been carefully taping up a file box, trembled slightly. You're Marcus Coleman, she said quietly. I always thought it would be you. Jaden stepped forward, but Andrea waved him off gently and reached beneath her desk. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a sealed manila envelope. He left this with me in late spring of 2009, told me not to open it, said if no one came asking within 7 years, I should destroy it. She looked directly at Marcus. But you came. Marcus took the envelope with reverent hands. The paper had yellowed at the corners, but Tyrese's handwriting was sharp, unflinching. Just one line across the front. From Marcus, when the world starts asking questions. Jaden held his breath as Marcus unsealed it. Inside were two items. First, a faded photograph. Tyrese standing near what looked like a concrete drainage vault, holding a rusted access badge labeled Sector B Fairview Basin. Second, a short handwritten note. They're hiding something under Sector B. Go below, but don't go alone. Marcus's hand clenched around the paper. This was taken just before he disappeared, wasn't it? Andrea nodded. The day he brought me that photo, he looked different. Jumpy, like he hadn't slept in days. He told me he'd stumbled on something during a pressure maintenance check. Said it wasn't just an engineering issue, it was political. Dangerous. Jaden's voice was low. What is Sector B? Andrea took a deep breath. It's where they rerouted the old wastewater and overflow systems during the 2009 redistricting project. Officially, it was condemned due to soil instability, but Tyrese found access still active, people going in and out at odd hours. He logged it in the system, but the entry was deleted. The next week, he vanished. Marcus stared at the photo again. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her voice cracked. Because a week after he disappeared, a man in a gray suit came to my apartment. He said my promotion would hold, if I forgot everything. If I spoke, I'd lose more than my job. The silence that followed felt like it stretched across all 7 years. Jaden finally stepped back, his mind racing. So, this means everything they told us about his disappearance? It was a lie. Marcus nodded grimly. And we have a map now. You're not seriously thinking of going into Sector B, are you? Andrea asked, her eyes pleading. Marcus folded the photo and note, placed them back into the envelope. He told me not to go alone. I won't. He glanced at Jaden. But I'm going. Andrea looked down, then walked to a filing cabinet and retrieved a blue folder. You'll need this, she whispered. It's the last inspection blueprint of Sector B before the site was officially decommissioned. No one's seen it since 2009. As Marcus took it, she whispered, he said if someone finally came for the truth, they'd have to go into the dark to find it. Then that's where we'll go, Marcus said. Into the dark. The storm drains beneath Fairview had long been forgotten by city workers. Officially sealed off after the redistricting project in 2009, they remained absent from maps, absent from memory. But as Marcus and Jaden stared at the blueprint Andrea had handed them, it became clear. Sector B had never truly been abandoned. Not entirely. The diagrams showed a series of overlapping tunnels with reinforced walls and maintenance access points that had been rerouted, not removed. The largest chamber, marked only as Vault 9, sat directly beneath a manhole just outside an old utilities shed behind the Fairview reservoir. If Tyrese really went down there in 2009, Jaden muttered, he was tracking something big. Marcus nodded, already folding the blueprints into his backpack. Something they didn't want discovered, and now we know exactly where to look. They waited until nightfall. Jaden had hesitated, offered alternate plans, call a journalist, go to the police, but Marcus shut him down with a single look. If we go public now, they'll bury it again, like they did before. At 11:42 p.m., they parked 2 blocks away from the reservoir and moved quietly through the back service lane, their flashlights wrapped in red cloth to keep the beams low and soft. The utilities shed was still there, padlocked, rusted, and half swallowed by ivy, but the manhole behind it looked untouched, as if it had been waiting for them. Marcus unscrewed the bolts one by one, the metal squealing in protest. A rush of cold air escaped from the opening, thick with rotten rust. 7 years, he whispered. This air hasn't moved in 7 years. The descent was slow, the iron ladder slick with condensation. Jaden's hands trembled as he followed Marcus into the dark. The flashlight cut narrow tunnels of red light against concrete walls etched with graffiti and time. Somewhere in the silence, water dripped, a hollow metallic echo that returned again and again like a whisper being passed between ghosts. They walked for what felt like hours, deeper through winding corridors, until finally they reached the chamber marked Vault 9. The door was heavy, metal, industrial, and slightly ajar. Jaden looked at Marcus, uncertain. This is it. Marcus nodded. He came here. They pushed the door open. Inside, the vault looked nothing like a maintenance room. There were no pipes, no valves, only a massive circular platform in the center. surrounded by banks of inactive monitors and what looked like shielding panels built into the walls. "This isn't city infrastructure," Jaden whispered. "This is something else." Marcus moved slowly, taking photos. In the far corner, something caught his eye. Scorch marks on the ground, as if something had exploded. And near it, fused into the floor, was a melted ID badge. The name was barely legible: Tyrese Coleman. Jaden's breath hitched. He was here. He was really here. Marcus crouched and reached out, fingers grazing the edge of the badge, when a sudden click echoed behind them. The heavy door slammed shut. They were no longer alone. From the shadows, a voice emerged, calm, female. "I warned him not to come back here." Jaden turned, fists raised. A woman stepped into the dim light, her face partially obscured beneath a hooded coat. "You're not city inspectors," she said, "and you're not with records." Marcus stood, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Who are you?" "I'm the last one left," she said. "The others ran when Tyrese disappeared. I stayed." "What happened to him?" Jaden asked. She looked down at the floor. "He found something he wasn't supposed to. This vault, it's not on any official plan because it wasn't built by the city. It was repurposed, contracted out in 2008 to a private security firm tied to 3 council members. They used it to bury experimental disposal systems, biotech runoff. Highly illegal, highly classified." Marcus stepped forward. "Tyrese discovered it? He logged the materials, tried to file a report. The next day, his system access was revoked. The badge they found on him, it had been deactivated that morning. No one was supposed to be able to enter this room without retinal clearance after that, but he came anyway, alone." Jaden's voice cracked. "So what happened? You killed him?" The woman looked at them, eyes hollow. "No, he triggered something. The vault's suppression system. It mistook him for a threat when he used the wrong credentials. It wasn't supposed to be lethal, but it burned him. Disintegrated 80% of his body. I tried to shut it down. By the time I got through, there was almost nothing left." Marcus backed against the wall, stunned. "And then you hid it?" "I collected what I could. I cremated the remains and put them in that urn myself. I mailed it to the only person he ever trusted, his little brother. And I ran." Jaden stared at her in horror. "You ran for 7 years." She nodded. "I had no choice. They were watching, but I came back 2 nights ago. I knew someone would follow the trail. I left the door open." Marcus whispered, "Why?" "Because it has to end," she said. "This room, these secrets, they have to be exposed. But not by me. You were his family. He trusted you." A silence heavier than concrete fell between them. Jaden stepped closer to the center of the vault. "Then, help us," he said. "Help us finish what he started." She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "Everything is on here. Files, footage, the activation logs. Enough to take down a dozen careers." Marcus took it with both hands, staring at it like a relic. "Then this is it." She turned and walked toward the sealed panel at the back of the vault. "No," she said over her shoulder. "This is only the beginning." The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Marcus's apartment as he and Jaden sat in silence. The flash drive Andrea had handed them hours earlier now plugged into an aging laptop that hummed with tension. No one spoke. The only sound was the slow scroll of directory files opening one by one. What they found was more than damning. It was systemic, deliberate, and horrifying. Detailed logs from 2008 to 2009 showed orders issued from high-ranking city officials to divert toxic waste into unauthorized underground chambers beneath Fairview, bypassing federal environmental regulation entirely. There were encrypted video files too, grainy security footage showing barrels marked with biohazard symbols being lowered into Vault 9, men in hazmat suits scanning documents Tyrese had flagged in his inspection reports, and most damning of all, a time-stamped clip dated April 17th, 2009, showing Tyrese Coleman entering the vault alone. Seconds later, an alarm blared. A red light filled the chamber. The footage cut out abruptly, replaced with a static image labeled Containment Protocol 4A Initiated. Jaden slammed the laptop shut. "They killed him," he said flatly. "They buried it, then blamed faulty memory. A missing report, maybe even made his family think he just ran off." Marcus stared at the screen, hollowed out. "They didn't just bury him, they erased him." His voice trembled. 7 years, and no one looked, no one asked. But Jaden wasn't listening anymore. He was scrolling through his phone, searching for a name. "There's a reporter," he muttered. "She used to work on infrastructure corruption, Naomi Brooks. She got blacklisted for publishing a story about missing city funds in 2011. If anyone will publish this, it's her." Marcus hesitated. "You trust her?" "I don't trust anyone," Jaden said. "But Tyrese died trying to bring this to light. We don't get to hide just because it's dangerous." That afternoon, they met Naomi in a coffee shop in the outskirts of Fairview. She looked like someone who had fought too many battles and lost too many of them. When they handed her the drive, she didn't flinch. "I've heard whispers about Vault 9 before," she said, eyes locked on Marcus, "but no one ever had proof, not until now." Jaden leaned forward. "If you run it, they'll come for you." Naomi smirked. "They already did, 10 years ago. Took my job, my credentials, my security clearance. All that's left is the truth. And I've been waiting 7 years for someone to bring it to me." She stood, tucking the drive into her coat. "Give me 72 hours. If I don't publish by then, assume I'm gone." Marcus watched her leave, unsure if they'd just saved a life or doomed another. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by Tyrese's old notebooks, sketches, annotated maps, pieces of a man who had tried to fix something far too big to carry alone. At 2:43 a.m., his phone buzzed, a blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, familiar yet strained, whispered through the receiver. "You shouldn't have opened the vault." The line went dead. Marcus sat frozen, the words crawling down his spine like ice. They knew. Somehow they still knew. The vault had been sealed. The records buried, the witnesses silenced. But the truth was now breathing, alive again. And someone didn't like that. He turned to Jaden, who was half asleep on the couch. "We started something we can't stop." Jaden looked up slowly. "Good. Maybe now the world will finally listen." But outside, in the dim silence of pre-dawn, a black car idled at the curb, its headlights off, windows tinted, watching, waiting. The vault was no longer buried, and neither were its secrets. 3 days passed like the ticking of a bomb. Naomi Brooks had disappeared. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her email bounced back. Her last social media post was a cryptic image of a rusted drain pipe with a single caption: "It breathes beneath." Marcus and Jaden watched the post go viral, then watched it vanish just hours later, scrubbed from every platform as if it had never existed. Panic crept in around the edges, but it wasn't loud. It was quiet. The kind of terror that made your hands shake when you reached for a glass of water and found your grip uncertain. "They got her," Jaden said that evening, staring at the empty driveway outside. Marcus didn't respond. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Tyrese's last envelope open in front of him again. They had read the note a dozen times. Go below, but don't go alone. But there was something else he hadn't shared yet, something folded behind the note, a page from a personal journal. And one sentence on that page chilled him more than anything they'd seen in the footage. "If they find out I copied the logs, they won't just erase me, they'll erase my name." Marcus finally spoke. This wasn't about hiding a death. This was about erasing a person's entire existence, like he was never born. Jaden's eyes widened. "You mean like digital deletion?" "Worse," Marcus whispered. "Legal, systemic, no birth certificate, no employment history, even the city badge that melted down in Vault 9. It wasn't in the archives anymore. We only have a photo. If we didn't find that, Tyrese Coleman would just be a rumor." They looked up as the lights flickered, once, twice, then held steady. Jaden stood, checking the windows. The car from before, it wasn't there anymore. But something was off. The air felt wrong, charged. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus walked to the hallway where the box of Tyrese's belongings still sat. He opened it again and noticed something new, an old cassette recorder buried beneath layers of inspection reports and pocket notebooks. A small yellow post-it stuck to the side. "For Marcus, don't play until it hurts too much to pretend." He clicked play. Tyrese's voice filled the room, tired, scared, but calm. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it, not really. And I know what you're thinking. It's too big, you're too small. But I promise you, truth always finds a way to breathe, even through concrete. They think erasure is power, but memory is stronger than death. Don't let them turn me into a ghost, not like this." The tape clicked off. Marcus's chest tightened. Jaden walked in, holding his phone. "You need to see this." He turned the screen around. An anonymous blog post had gone live. Naomi's voice, her writing. It began, "I am publishing this from a remote server because the city has already tried to silence me. What lies beneath Fairview is not just negligence. It is a legacy of sanctioned disappearance. I have evidence. If this post vanishes, so do I. But someone else has the files now. Someone closer than they think." The city responded within hours. Officials denied everything, called it fabricated, called Naomi unstable. But the post had been screenshotted 1,000 times. It couldn't be unseen. Protesters began to gather near the Fairview reservoir. Old workers came forward anonymously. Engineers, maintenance crew, even a former city clerk, all confirming something dark was buried beneath Sector B. And then came the second wave. Families who had lost someone between 2008 and 2011, always city workers, always filed under voluntary resignation or no known forwarding address. A pattern emerged, a chilling one. Jaden whispered, "Tyrese wasn't the only one." Marcus nodded. But he was the first to try and fight it. They stared out the window again. The car was back. But this time, it didn't wait. It slowly rolled past the house, then disappeared into the dark. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. This time, it was filled with the weight of voices too long suppressed, voices clawing back to the surface. Tyrese had spoken. The dead were speaking. And the city was listening now, whether it wanted to or not. The sun rose behind a curtain of storm clouds, casting Fairview in a dim, gray hush, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Marcus stood at the edge of the reservoir, where the grass met concrete, where the fence line curled around the old utilities path, now cordoned off with yellow tape that flapped weakly in the wind. Behind him, Jaden adjusted a black duffel bag across his shoulder. Inside, a copy of the flash drive, a printed version of the blueprints, and one thing more. Tyrese's melted badge, encased now in a plastic protector, like a relic from a war no one wanted to admit happened. "Are you sure you want to go back down there?" Jaden asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at the rusted manhole cover, the same one they'd lifted days ago. Only now, 2 city workers stood watch beside it, stone-faced. Not guards, not officials, whistleblowers, allies. They'd read Naomi's post. They'd seen the proof. And now, without orders, without permits, they stepped aside. One of them whispered, "Find whatever's left of him." Marcus climbed down first, retracing the ladder rung by rung, each step echoing louder than the last. Jaden followed close behind. The silence below was no longer empty. It vibrated with history, with the hum of old electricity reawakened, with memories pressed into concrete like fingerprints. They walked back through the tunnels toward Vault 9. The door was open, just as they'd left it. But something had changed. The monitors, long dead, now flickered dimly. One in the far corner buzzed, and a low static hum emitted from the speakers. Marcus approached slowly. The screen flashed once, twice, then a grainy image appeared. Tyrese, standing in the vault. Not a still photo. Video. A recovered feed. He looked directly at the camera. "If this ever plays again," his voice echoed through the chamber, "then someone made it back. Someone cared enough to follow the trail, and that means they didn't win." Jaden froze. This was cued. He set this up before he... Tyrese's voice continued. "They tried to erase me. But what they didn't understand was that truth doesn't live in systems. It lives in people. If you're here, if you're watching, then you are the resistance. Not with weapons, with memory." The video cut to black. A pause, then a prompt appeared. "Initiate system purge YN." Marcus didn't hesitate. He hit Y. The vault rumbled gently. Somewhere deep beneath their feet, databanks and hidden archives began to purge. Not just logs, but encrypted copies of orders, footage, falsified permits. Every remnant of the project now broadcasting outward to mirrored servers set up by Naomi, now protected by the journalist networks who had picked up the story. Outside, the city changed. Protests turned into formal hearings. An independent inquiry was launched. Names were named, indictments filed. And beneath it all, the story of Tyrese Coleman, the engineer who vanished, became a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Weeks later, Marcus stood at the edge of the river with Jaden, scattering what remained of Tyrese's ashes into the wind. It wasn't the first goodbye, but it felt like the most honest. Jaden spoke softly. "You think he knew we'd do it? Finish it?" Marcus looked up. "I think he hoped someone would remember. And we did. Behind them, a mural was being painted along the water wall. Tyrese's face, eyes clear, hand reaching upward. Not for glory, but for light. The caption read, "Buried truth always rises." The vault was sealed for good now, monitored by federal teams, turned into a symbol of oversight and accountability. But to Marcus, it would always be more than that. It was the place where the dead spoke, where memory proved stronger than erasure, and where love for a brother became louder than fear. As he walked away for the final time, Marcus whispered a promise to the wind. "You were never forgotten." And in the hush between heartbeats, it almost felt like someone answered, Tyrese Coleman vanished in 2009. But what truly disappeared was far greater than one man. It was a truth too dangerous to be seen, a name too threatening to be remembered, a life too brave to be allowed to echo. And yet, against silence, against fear, against a system built to erase, he endured. Through the hands of his brother, through the courage of those who chose to see, and through the cracks in the concrete where even shadows cannot hide forever. In the end, justice did not arrive in a courtroom or a headline. It arrived in a whisper, in an old recording, in the quiet decision to remember. Because memory is resistance, because silence is never the end, and because truth, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds its way to the surface. He was never just missing, he was waiting to be found.